The wind called to her. How she longed to be out in the boats with her sister and brothers and father. How she longed to take the tiller and ride the tides and catch the fish. But she was only 11. It would be 2 more years before she was allowed. Sometimes, on days with soft breezes, one of her siblings might take her out for a short sail on a skiff along the shore, and she would thrill to the pressure of the wind against the canvas and the touch of the wind on her face. And the wind sang her sweet lullabies, just like her mother did when she was upset from a dream. When the wind blew with full force, she would go down to the shore and she would let it wrap its invisible arms around her and let it whip her hair. And she would inhale the power of the wind with every breath. But for now, she had to collect as much seaweed as she could from the tidal ponds and put it into that basket of palm fronds. It was to be part of the fish stew that she would help her mother make for their evening meal. At least it brought her down to the shore, where she was able to talk with the wind. Her mother would tell her the old family stories, and she taught her to weave and to mend the nets. But the girl knew that she was born to be at sea. She knew that she was a true daughter of the wind. And sometimes she would try to tell her mother that. But her mother told her she just had to wait for her time. Sometimes her mother would tell her the stories about the time before she was married, when she got to work the boats and set the nets and help haul in the harvest. A harvest of slippery silver fish that flipped and flapped as it hit the bottom of the boat. She heard of the sunrises, the color of yellow that foretold good fortune, and of the red ones that did not. She heard of the flying fish that would skim across the water with their huge pectoral fins. She heard about the strong currents and the tides and the storms. And she knew that the wind could be calm one minute and blow brutally strong the next. And she knew that all of these stories were intended to help her when she got older. But somehow, she wasn't getting older fast enough. And so, she stirred the stew, and she fed the fire. And when she did this, the wind was silent, and it made her feel somehow empty. At sunset, the fishers returned with the catch, and everyone went down to help them haul in the boats and make them fast with heavy woven ropes. Those who had been ashore would hold their family members and their friends and welcome them safely home. Then they would all admire the catch, and there were many baskets of fish, but somehow this time they seemed smaller than usual. The crews would prepare the fish as they would catch them. They would harvest the roe, and they would throw the offal overboard for any creatures to feed on. Nothing was wasted. The next morning, the sun peeked over the horizon in a crimson hue, and the girl went down to the shore where she could begin to feel that first morning breeze as it built with day. And as she peered out across the water, she saw that one of the boats had broken free during the night. And she knew that it would be a hardship for her people. And she knew that she should run and tell her mother and father. But just then, a little puff made its way into her ear, and it put an idea in her head. What if she swam out and brought the boat back by herself? She felt fearless. She was a good swimmer, and the water was calm. She could be a hero. And so persuasive was that puff that she forgot all of her mother's teachings, and she forgot all of the warnings that were part of the fabric of her heritage. And she waded out into the water until it was too deep. And then she swam long, easy strokes. It wouldn't be long now before she would be able to get to the boat. But somehow, every time she thought she was getting close enough, the boat was further away. Distances on the water can be deceiving. And pretty soon, she began to grow tired, and she began to think she wasn't going to be any kind of hero at all, but instead drown at sea. And she was angry at the wind for having given her false pride and confidence. She blamed it on the wind. Suddenly, something bumped her from behind. It was the boat. And she knew that she was wrong and that the wind had sent it to her for her salvation. She pulled her way up into the boat and got inside with a sigh of relief, but she didn't wait long because she knew as the sun got hotter during the day that the breeze would build, and not even the wind could control the sun. So as quickly as she could, she stepped the small mast and she set a course for home. But it wasn't soon enough. Already, the sun had shared its heat with the water, and the wind and the waves and the clouds grew high. And soon she could only see a small strip of land between the waves, the mountains of rolling water. And then it started to rain, and she could not see the shore at all. But the wind whispered sweet songs in the rigging, and the girl closed her eyes. In the morning, she awoke to a sky that was the color of lemons and a breeze that would surely take her home. And she set a true course. And soon, she approached her familiar lake shore. And she could see her people standing on the shore, waiting for her. And she thought back to herself of when she thought she would be drowning. And she had the vision that she had back then. A vision of herself, pale and still. A vision of herself with seaweeds and sponges in her hair. And her family shuddered with grief. It was her mother that found her, and she could see her mother's salt tears intermingle with the salt that already encrusted her face. But she paid it no mind. She was almost home, and she saw the people waiting on shore. But as her friend, the wind, drew her closer to the coast, she realized that no one was looking seaward. Instead, they were looking at something on the beach. She got to shore, and she couldn't understand why no one came to help her, but somehow she managed to get the boat to shore. She was cold, and she was tired, and she was hungry, and she just didn't understand. But when she walked over to where they were all standing and looked at what they all saw, she understood. She saw her own lifeless form, pale and still, seaweed and sponges woven in her hair. Her family and friends shuddering with grief, and it was her mother that found her. And she could see her mother's salt tears falling on her daughter's face, intermingling with the salt that already encrusted it. And the girl could see the broken tiller clutched in her stiff little hand. The wind roared around her, and it started to spin her, and it held her in its embrace, and she became one with the wind.